Beneath the glittering chandeliers, a billionaire once hailed as the golden heart of America ordered his black maid to kneel and lick a fallen cupcake. Off the marble floor, unaware that the woman he humiliated held the secret that would destroy his entire empire, Julian. Thorne's charity gala glittered like a royal ball. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across sparkling champagne glasses, and the laughter of the elite rang out sharp and careless, as if pain didn't exist anywhere beyond those marble walls. In the far corner of the grand hall, among the swirl of designer gowns and tuxedos, Maya Washington, a black housemaid, quietly bent down to wipe up a spill of wine. Her uniform clung close, blending her into the background. She was invisible. No name, no voice, just another shadow serving the powerful. "You haven't eaten anything all night, have you?" a hesitant young voice asked. Maya looked up. Leo Thorne, 17, perfectly dressed, the kind of boy born into perfection, stood before her, holding out a small vanilla cupcake. "I saw how you're always helping everyone," he said softly. "I thought you deserved one too." Maya smiled, a rare, genuine smile in a room full of masks. She was about to accept when another voice sliced through the air, cold and metallic. "Leo, step away from her." Julian Thorne, the man whose name alone could silence an entire room. He strode over, his ice-blue eyes cutting through Maya as if she were dirt on his floor. Without hesitation, he snatched the cupcake from his son's hand and hurled it at the marble. A sharp thud echoed. Frosting splattered like spilled guilt. Then, in a calm, deliberate tone that chilled the air, he said, "You've stained my floor. With garbage!" Julian tilted his head slightly, pointing at the mess. "Kneel and clean it up. With your tongue." No one moved. No one breathed. The chandelier's light no longer shimmered. It judged. And there she stood. A black woman surrounded by white power and privilege. Would she bow to humiliation or begin her fight right here in the heart of their kingdom? After that night of humiliation, Maya didn't cry. She simply stood in her small room, hands still trembling with the anger she had swallowed for far too long. Outside the window, the Thorne estate lay in silence. Only the faint light of the garden lamps glowed against the cold white walls. In that stillness, Maya understood something with painful clarity. She was exactly where she needed to be. Tonight's humiliation was only the spark for a greater fire. To the world, Julian Thorne was the face of compassion. Forbes called him the golden heart in a world of steel. The photographs showed him shaking hands with doctors, awarding scholarships, and smiling tenderly beside orphans. But inside this mansion, when no camera was pointed his way, that golden heart turned to stone. Maya had seen him shout at staff for arranging the wrong wine glass, watched him smash a bottle of Merlot because of a single stain on imported mahogany. Serafina, his elegant wife with a voice soft as silk, stood by his side at every event, her gentle smile concealing the cruelty beneath. She was the perfect mask of power, cold, graceful, and sharp as glass. And Leo, the 17-year-old son, was the only light left in this household of shadows. His heart was kind, but he was also a prisoner. Bound by the family name that glittered like a cage, Maya had worked here long enough to see the truth. Julian wasn't merely cruel. He was dangerous. He knew how to make people believe he was good, how to paint sin with the color of morality, how to wrap corruption in the language of charity. Every time she saw him praised on television, she smiled bitterly, because she, more than anyone, knew what he was hiding, the secret that had stolen the person she loved most. 5 years ago, back when Maya was working night shifts at a rundown cafe, she received the call that changed everything. A police officer's voice, dry and detached, told her that her brother, David Washington, had been in an accident. "A hit and run," they said. She ran to the hospital only to find his lifeless body lying on a white bed. There were no witnesses, no footage, no justice. From that night on, Maya was no longer the woman she used to be. She turned her grief into purpose. For years, she followed every faint lead, rumors, forgotten case files, deleted emails, a black luxury car, a technical glitch in an internal call record, a witness who remembered hearing loud music before the crash. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed, and every road led to one name: Julian Thorne. She applied for a job at the Thorne estate, disguising herself as a quiet, middle-aged black housemaid looking for steady work. No one paid attention. They saw her silence as obedience, her diligence as dullness. They never suspected she remembered everything: the position of every key, every drawer, every careless word whispered when they thought no one was listening. Maya didn't need violence. She needed proof. And she knew truth often hides in the smallest corners of great houses. One afternoon, while cleaning the garage, she found something that made her blood freeze. Under a dust-covered tarp sat an old black Bentley, resting there like a corpse embalmed in polish. She crouched down, running her fingers over the front bumper. A faint dent, hastily repainted. The glossy coat looked flawless under dim light, but in the sunlight she could see it clearly. A thin trace of dried red. No one else would have noticed, but Maya did. She always did. That night, when everyone slept, she slipped back into the garage with a small flashlight and a tool kit. She unscrewed the cover of an abandoned security camera, wiped away the dust, and reconnected the wires. The hard drive was still inside, coated in grime like ash. Part of her feared it was empty, but her hands didn't stop. Hours passed. The laptop screen flickered. And there it was, a grainy image of the Bentley speeding through the gate into the dark. Headlights blazing. A few hours later, it returned, its hood crushed and glinting under the same security light. Maya stared at the footage, her knuckles white around the mouse. She had crossed into the edge of truth, but this alone wasn't enough. She needed something undeniable. The chance came one morning when Julian left for a press event, and Serafina was busy preparing for her television interview. Maya was asked to clean his private study, a place few dared to enter. The room smelled of cigars and aged wood. Photos lined the desk. Portraits of Julian smiling, awards gleaming, each frame a hymn to his ego. But beneath the lower shelf, she spotted a small safe, unlocked. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry, only a black SD card. Maya picked it up. Her pulse thudded in her throat. Her instincts were never wrong. That night, in the basement room she called home, she turned on her laptop. The faint blue light washed across her face as the video began to play. Loud music, laughter, then a crash. The sound of metal twisting, a scream. And then came a man's voice, cold, unmistakable. "It's just a kid. Drive." A woman's voice trembled in reply. "Julian, we have to stop." "Shut up. You want to lose everything?" "Drive." Maya froze. The world around her seemed to fall away. She pressed her hand to her mouth to hold in a sob. It was his voice, David's, and the man who killed him was eating dinner just a few feet above her every night. She copied the video to her own drive and carefully placed the original back in the safe. When she stood up, her eyes were dry. From now on, her tears had value only when turned into evidence. In the following days, Maya worked as if nothing had changed. She brewed coffee, polished silver, and folded napkins. But within her calm gestures lived a silent storm. She was no longer the servant. She was the keeper of a key that could bring down an empire. At night, she would stare out the kitchen window, watching the reflection of the mansion shimmer over the garden pond. The water looked still, but beneath it, a storm was rising just like her. She knew. The time for truth was drawing near. If anyone had seen Maya then, they would have only seen a slim black woman polishing a wineglass beneath warm golden light. But inside her burned a fire, lit by loss, fueled by humiliation, and blazing now with the conviction that justice still existed. If one dared to create it, now you understand. The woman humiliated at the gala wasn't just fighting for her dignity. She was fighting for her brother's soul. And no one in the Thorne mansion knew. The verdict was already in her hands. If you believe that justice never arrives too late, hit like now. And if you think one ordinary person can't bring down a billionaire, stay tuned. Because in the next chapter, you'll see how a single word can make an empire crumble. The next Thorne charity gala took place a week after the cupcake incident. On the surface, everything looked as if nothing had happened. The chandeliers still sparkled, the orchestra played its gentle waltz, and Julian Thorne still reigned as the saint of the elite, a man admired across the nation for his generosity. But beneath the glow, something had shifted. Maya Washington, the black maid no one ever noticed, stood quietly in the corner with a tray of champagne. No one looked her way, and that made it easier to breathe. She had everything she needed. Tonight she wasn't a servant. She was the judge. Julian stood at the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the city's most powerful people. He laughed, shook hands, and smiled like a lion pacing inside a golden cage. His voice rolled smoothly through the microphone. "We're not just building hospitals. We're building the future!" The room erupted in applause. Smiles bloomed like paper flowers, beautiful, lifeless. Maya's gaze didn't waver. She saw what the others couldn't. The way Julian's hand tightened around his glass when someone casually mentioned an old article about an unsolved accident. She saw Serafina, the graceful wife, glance toward him with fear, barely hidden behind her practiced smile. And she saw Leo, the 17-year-old son, sitting in the front row, head bowed in silence amid the applause. In the music, Maya heard the lie. Every smile in this room was bought with fear. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had been preparing for this moment for 5 long years, since the night her world turned to ash on Old Creek Road. "Miss Maya," Leo whispered as she passed by his table. His eyes were soft, torn between guilt and admiration. "Are you all right?" She smiled faintly. "Do you believe in thunder, Leo?" "Thunder?" He frowned. "Yes, the thing that comes before the storm." She set down her tray and added quietly, "You'll hear it tonight." Before Leo could reply, Julian turned. "Leo, what are you doing over there?" His tone snapped like a whip, and Leo immediately sank back into his chair. Julian's piercing blue eyes shifted to Maya, gleaming with disdain. "Haven't you learned your place yet? Don't forget who you are." Maya bowed her head slightly, her voice steady. "My place? I never forgot. But sometimes, sir, one must kneel long enough to know how dirty the ground really is." Julian froze for half a second, then laughed sharply. "You're lecturing me about morals? You, a maid?" "No," Maya replied, eyes unwavering. "I'm reminding you that all blood is red." The air seemed to thicken. Serafina's smile faltered, and Julian's grip on his glass grew so tight that the crystal gave a faint crack. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. One word from me, and you'll never work in this city again." "Maybe," she said softly. "But you forget something, Mr. Thorne. Those who think they're gods never see Judgment Day coming." Julian chuckled, but the sound was brittle. He turned to walk away, until her voice cut through the air, calm and deliberate. "Do you remember the night of October 24th? The room fell silent. The orchestra stopped mid-note. Julian turned back, brow furrowed. "What?" "That night," Maya said, "you were driving your black Bentley. On Old Creek Road, around 11 p.m. Every sound vanished. Serafina's hands trembled around her glass. Leo's head jerked up, confusion written across his face. Julian gave a sharp laugh. Are you insane? What are you implying? Nothing, Maya answered. I'm only asking, do you ever hear the sound of breaks in your dreams? Guests glanced at one another, whispering. What is she talking about? Someone murmured. There's something going on between them. Another guessed. Julian's face reddened. Enough! Shut your mouth! His voice cracked, no longer polished, but raw, panic bleeding through his rage. Maya didn't flinch. Her eyes shone with a quiet power that silenced the room. Do you know what's truly terrifying? She asked. Julian said nothing. It's not death, she continued. It's believing you've buried the past, and realizing it's still standing there, staring at you. The words hit like a gunshot. A waiter in the far corner dropped a spoon, and the sharp clatter echoed through the hall. Julian stepped forward, voice hoarse. What do you want? Maya took one step back, her gaze unwavering. Not money, not an apology. I just want you to hear one thing. He hesitated, suddenly unsure, as though he was standing on the edge of something dark and bottomless. You think you can scare me with this nonsense? She smiled, a quiet, almost gentle smile. I don't need to scare you. I just need to speak. The room seemed to hold its breath. Her next word came out low, clear, unshakable. David. No one understood, but Julian did. His hand dropped from her hair as if struck by lightning. His face drained of color. Silence fell like a curtain. No one knew who David was, only Julian, and that was why his body began to tremble. That name, David, split the air like a blade through silk. The music died. The laughter stopped. The grand ballroom, moments ago so loud and alive, turned into a crypt of glass and gold. Julian Thorne froze. His mouth trembled. His eyes went hollow, the color draining from his face, as though the name itself had cut straight through his chest. The heart he'd believed untouchable, armored with wealth, worship, and power, had begun to crack. No one understood what had just happened. Only two people did, Julian and Serafina. She covered her mouth, her voice trembling. Oh God, Julian. He spun on her, panic breaking through his mask. Be quiet. You know exactly what she means. I said, be quiet. The shout burst from him like thunder, tearing apart the last illusion of control. To everyone watching, he was no longer a billionaire icon or a visionary philanthropist. He was a frightened man cornered by a truth he couldn't kill. Maya stood still, calm, unmoving. She didn't have to speak again. That one word had already done the work. Now it was time for the truth to speak for itself. Julian's voice cracked. Lies! She's lying! You all know me. Julian Thorne. I've given, I've helped, His words faltered, collapsing under the weight of his own history. From the front row, Leo stood up. Dad! Julian turned toward him, wild-eyed. Sit down, Leo. What are you hiding from me? The boy whispered. Nothing! Julian barked. She's making this up! But then, a flicker of light filled the room. The massive screen behind the stage blinked back to life. The Thorne Foundation logo vanished, replaced by shaky black and white footage. Julian's blood went cold. What did you do? He hissed. Maya's voice was quiet, almost tender. Nothing. I just pressed play. The room held its breath. The camera footage was grainy, the headlights glaring against a dark country road. Loud rock music bled through the speakers. Then, a figure darted across the street, a screech of tires, a sickening crash. Silence. And then came Julian's voice, low and icy. It's just a kid. Drive! A woman's panicked cry followed. Serafina's. Julian, we have to stop. Shut up, he barked. Do you want to lose everything? Drive! The screen went black. The silence afterward was unbearable. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Julian staggered, gripping the edge of a table for balance. No, it's fake. It's all fake. Serafina slumped into a chair, her face drained of color. "You promised me," she whispered, broken. "You promised no one would ever know." "Shut up." Julian roared, but the sound cracked, desperate and hollow. Leo turned to his father, his voice trembling. "Dad, is it true?" Julian shook his head violently, spittle flying as he stammered, "No, son, it's a setup." But the strength was gone from his words. A liar's hands always shake. Leo stared at him. "You told me a man with honor never runs away." "That's enough, Leo. But you ran from a life." Maya said nothing. She didn't need to. The accusation had already been spoken, in the only voice Julian couldn't silence, his son's. Around the room, guests began gathering their coats, muttering, avoiding his eyes. A few bowed their heads, ashamed to have ever called him a friend. Others fumbled for their phones, desperate to leave before the scandal consumed them too. Julian lashed out, wild with fury. "All of you, hypocrites! You took my money. You begged for my approval. And now you judge me?" A man near the back replied bitterly, "No, Julian. We just finally know where the money came from." The words landed like a final blow. Julian's knees buckled. His breath came in ragged bursts as he looked around the glittering room, a desert of faces that once worshipped him, now turned away. Maya took one step forward. "You once told me there are people born to serve," she said softly. "Maybe you were right, but there's one thing you got wrong." He lifted his head weakly. "What's that?" "The truth doesn't serve anyone." Her words fell like the sound of a judge's gavel. Then came the footsteps, steady, echoing from the hall. Two police officers appeared at the door, rain still glistening on their coats. Red lights from the cruisers outside flickered through the windows, staining the floor crimson. "Julian Thorne," one officer announced, voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest for vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of a fatal accident." No one spoke. Julian straightened, shaking, his face twisting with disbelief. "You can't do this. I'm Julian Thorne." A metallic click cut through his words. The sound of handcuffs closing around his wrists was sharp enough to make the crowd flinch. Serafina wept quietly. Leo stood motionless. Julian looked up at Maya, eyes burning with hatred. "You think you've won?" She met his gaze. "I don't need to win," she said softly. "I just need my brother to rest." He gave a dry, broken laugh. "You don't understand. My money will make them forget. Everything will go back to the way it was." Maya's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Maybe, but you forgot one thing, Julian. People only forget what they never saw. And tonight, everyone saw everything." He fell silent. For the first time in his long, arrogant life, Julian Thorne had no words. As the officers led him away, he looked back one last time. But no one in that glittering room looked back at him, not his wife, not his son, not a single friend. Only Maya remained, standing still as stone. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched as a kingdom built on lies crumbled into dust. The door closed behind him with a heavy slam. The ballroom lights still shimmered, but their warmth was gone. People whispered, uncertain whether to cry or to applaud. Someone murmured, "I thought he was a good man." Another voice replied, "Sometimes the devil wears a halo." Maya walked through the crowd, her hands trembling faintly from exhaustion. As she passed Leo, he whispered, "Miss Maya, I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner." She stopped, her voice soft but steady. "You understand now. That's enough." He lowered his head, and Maya walked on, past the marble, the chandeliers, the echoes of power fading behind her. Outside, the sky had opened up, rain falling in sheets. She didn't raise her umbrella. She let the rain wash over her face, cold and clean. It wasn't tears anymore. It was released. Somewhere within her, David's voice no longer cried. It breathed. Peaceful. Maya lifted her head toward the storm and whispered to the wind, "I told you, David, The truth never sleeps. A flash of lightning lit the horizon, revealing the grand doors behind her, closing on a lifetime of deceit. The morning after that storm, the city woke to a strange kind of clarity. Sunlight spilled across glass towers, cold but painfully clean, like the world itself had been rinsed of lies. Every newspaper carried the same headline, "Julian Thorne arrested," and beneath it, the same photograph. A once untouchable billionaire, handcuffed, eyes hollow. An empire collapsed in 7 seconds. The 7 seconds of a video Maya Washington had carried in her heart for 5 long years. But victory didn't feel like triumph. When Maya stepped out of her small apartment that morning, the weight on her shoulders was heavier than ever. On one side, justice. On the other hand, emptiness. The city buzzed as always. People talked, argued, shared the video. The philanthropist who killed a boy. Some were angry. Some were gleeful. None of them knew what those 7 seconds had cost. The years of silence, the tears, the promise that had refused to die. Maya sat on a bench outside the old hospital where David had once volunteered. Doctors passed by, nurses hurried, children laughed in the distance. Ordinary faces, ordinary lives. She could almost hear her brother's voice again. If one more person does the right thing today, the world will be a little less cruel. She smiled faintly. You were right, David. But doing the right thing, it cuts deep. Across town, Serafina Thorne sat in her silent living room. The curtains trembled gently in the morning breeze, casting shifting shadows across her pale face. For the first time in years, she wasn't wearing makeup. No mask, no armor. Before her lay an old family photo, Julian, Leo, and herself, frozen in a happier illusion. She traced her finger over Julian's face and whispered, I stayed quiet so long. I forgot what my own voice sounded like. The phone buzzed on the table. A message. From Maya, he'll face justice. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Serafina stared at the screen. Tears blurred the words. Of all the people in Julian's world, only the black maid he'd humiliated had shown her kindness. Sometimes, light doesn't come from heaven. It comes from those who've already walked through hell. Leo didn't go to school that day. He walked to Old Creek Bridge, the place he somehow knew was where it had all begun. The wind whipped his hair. The river below churned, gray and restless. He gripped the railing, staring down. His father's words still echoed in his head. Money can buy everything. And then Maya's voice. Not tonight. He didn't know who to believe. But for the first time, he knew he had to choose. Pulling out his phone, he opened his social feed and typed one line. The truth doesn't die. It just waits to be heard. Within hours, the post had millions of shares. He didn't know if Maya had seen it. But if David were alive, Leo was sure. He'd be smiling. Days later, Maya walked into the courthouse, not as a witness, just as a woman who needed to see it through. The courtroom door opened, and Julian Thorne was led inside. No tailored suit, no bodyguards. The orange prison uniform made him look smaller, like a man finally reduced to his true size. Their eyes met across the room. No anger, no hatred, only the quiet recognition between two souls who both knew the fight was over. When the judge declared, the defendant will remain in custody pending trial, Julian lowered his head. There was no applause, no noise, because real justice rarely arrives with fanfare. It arrives in silence. Maya stepped outside. The sunlight filtered through the trees, scattering gold across the pavement. She tilted her face upward and closed her eyes. Maybe David would have liked this sky. That night, she opened an old wooden box. Inside was David's paintbrush and a note he'd written long ago. If it feels like the dark is winning, don't be afraid. Darkness only exists where light dares to fight it. She placed the note back and whispered, The light doesn't come from the sky, David. It comes from people. Outside her window, The city pulsed with life. Sirens, laughter, the heartbeat of a world that kept moving forward. Yet beneath the noise, she heard something else. Peace. Not perfect, but real. 3 weeks later, a new scholarship fund appeared. The David Washington Foundation, founded by Maya herself. She didn't have much money, but she had faith. It was for underprivileged students who loved art, the kind of dreamers her brother once was. When a reporter asked, "Are you doing this for revenge?" Maya smiled and shook her head. "No, I'm doing it to remember. Because forgetting is the cruelest revenge of all." Her words spread everywhere, quoted, shared, and celebrated. But Maya didn't care about any of that. She cared only about the first few paintings that hung on the office wall, bright, messy watercolor pieces from children who dared to color their world. Colors David never got the chance to paint. That evening, she stood on her small balcony as misty rain began to fall. The streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflections trembling like fragments of memory. Maya closed her eyes, not to pray, not to wish, just to say one quiet thing, to her brother and to herself. Justice isn't perfect, but it has a heart, and tonight, it finally beat. Tomorrow, the headlines would change. The world would move on. But somewhere, in a small room above a noisy street, a black maid, once humiliated, now taught children how to paint the light. Light she had to walk through darkness to find. Because for Maya Washington, the truth was never an ending. It was a beginning. The only legacy worth keeping. If you believe integrity can change the world, leave a comment for Maya. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story for more stories that touch the heart, where justice, kindness, and hope still live.